Third grade is where we begin multiplication, and they start this out right at the beginning of the year with any of the IM products. I recommend that you also have your students create an account with what is now Amplified Desmos, the multiplication by heart that used to be available on Mathicon Polypad. And those visual manipulative, either if you have the physical cards or the digital cards, go along with this really nicely and are a great way for students to have distributed practice. So I really recommend um, getting a free account for that as well. The first section of this first unit doesn't deal explicitly with multiplication, but there are a couple places that I want to highlight the quick images that are used in lessons 4, 5, 15, 19, etc. So I'm just going to go over real quick to this one. So you can see here, we're beginning to think about, okay, there are groups of 5. So we're using a dot pattern that hopefully students are familiar with if they've had an opportunity to use dice or play games. And so we want to begin to think about, okay, instead of counting each individual pip or dot, can I see that as 3 groups of 5? And we want to begin to say this as we are recording students thinking, oh, okay, that student counted 3 groups of 5, and that equals 15. We want to start introducing that language of groups of as we move through this unit. When we get to lessons 9 and 10, that's when we're really going to begin to focus on our facts for 2, 5, and 10. And we're also going to highlight examples of doubles facts. So that goes right along with thinking about our facts for 2. In our synthesis for lessons 9 and 10, you're really going to want to focus on, again, that language of groups of. And we're doing all of this work within story problems to provide context. You're doing that within data. And we're going to be using Rec and Rec to help us see doubles. You might use square tiles to see groups of, or dice. And I'm going to include some examples of that in just a couple of minutes. So if we look at this example here, this is where we begin that transition over to looking at groups of, and this is in lesson number 9. So we're thinking about that in that each of these squares represents 2 signs. And so having students move to thinking of, okay, each one of these is a group of 2. So how can I count that without counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc.? Can I count by 2s or skip counts, which goes along with the choral count that was part of the warm-up in a recent lesson. So we're going to be doing that in lesson 9. Lesson 11 then moves into this idea of thinking about doubling and ideas around that. And they're going to give you some visual representations that we're going to use to help think of those early facts. I'm going to show some other examples as well. And then additionally, I have some dice pattern slides that will be available on my website where you can learn more about that. And we will continue in a little bit. Okay, so let's look at some manipulatives that we could use during Unit 1 in Grade 3 if we're considering our fluency plan. So one of the ideas that we want to think about is the use of doubles. So I really like using a couple of tools for that, one being the Rec and Rec. So we can see in groups of 2. So I have 2, 4, or I can see what is 2 times 2, 2 groups of 2, 2 groups of 3, etc. So this is one of those ways that I can model that or have students model that. And this is also really helpful when we're thinking about using this for story problems and how we might model that. So that would be one of those first places that I would consider that, is thinking about this. The other that I really like using are these, and these are magnetic. I have smaller versions for students as well. So the use of quick images, which I shared a couple of examples from lessons 4, 5, there's some in 15 and 19. If we're thinking about using quick images with students. So dot patterns in DICE tend to be really fantastic for that. So there's a smaller group of that for students, and then there's this larger amount that can be used on a magnetic whiteboard. So we're thinking about this with the use of a 10 frame. And remember, in this first unit, we're only focusing on groups of 2, 5, and 10. And so we're thinking about that, like one group of 2. And then I can think about that as what does 2 groups of 2 look like. And I can put it in either case. So I can look at it like I did with the Rec and Rec, or I can consider that with a 10 frame. So that's another way to kind of think about that during these lessons. I would suggest in small group, really focusing in on this idea of quick images and how students are seeing it with a 10 frame. Additionally, once you get to section C, we're going to want to focus on introducing the zero property for multiplication and our ones. So I have one group of 3, or one group of 1, or one group of 10, and help students see that and have an understanding of that. After they go through this first unit, you're going to want to assess for progress their 0, 1, 2, 5, 10 facts, just to see where they are and help them figure out which things they need to practice next. I'm going to have a separate video on using, or a resource using these. I've created a slideshow that you can use that will help introduce these facts. So I'll link that in the space below.